times, over 7 times. It was the fact that they talked about when the pulse was there and when it was no longer there, that additional 2 minutes that he still was on the neck, that is going to be very hard to get out of the minds of the jury. And I can't help but, most of my time as a private investigator was only with the defense, but I can't help but question the strategy when the defense attorney Nelson said yesterday, well, jury, you know, if he's talking, then he's breathing. But it almost begs the question, when Mr. Floyd stopped talking, then you had to have known that he was no longer breathing. When they checked the pulse and there was no pulse, you had to have known that he wasn't breathing. And I think that alone is going to be hard to square. Not only that, the fact that they said this was not an anti-police prosecution, but it was a pro-police. Remember, going in already, the prosecution is at a deficit, even with the video, because how Americans viewed the police. This is why they had a very strategic way of handling it. They did not talk about race. They talked about the fact that this was a lone wolf, essentially, that he was one of the bad ones, that this is a noble profession. They made the point to say that this is a pro-police prosecution. And not only that, when it comes to the use of force, they decided to bring in numerous amount of experts, all the way from the police chief, who, by the way, had already sued the police department before for racism. They did not bring that up in their prosecution. They decided to stick with, this is what the profession is, this is what the profession should be, and this guy essentially was on a power trip. And in the closing statement, they talked about that even when you had a member of law enforcement, one of the bad ones, essentially, they were alluding to, with the knee on the neck, that the citizens that were surrounding the area still called the police because they still had faith in the police. They wanted to make it very clear that they were pro-police and that this guy was a lone wolf. That was very telling to me.
Yeah, also telling, if you think about it, Lawrence, was how Chauvin was abandoned by a lot of his fellow police officers and his immediate superiors in this trial. Not across the board, but that they had seen that this was exceptionally brutal, and they distinguished it from other actions that would be more acceptable. I'm just wondering, that had to have hurt the defense, making the argument that these were trumped up or excessive charges for something that they deemed was not an excessive act. That we don't know. Once we get the verdict, we will. That didn't seem to resonate.
Well, what they did, Neil, which I think was hard, is that they relied and they had some experts, but the majority of their defense relied on the policies and procedures that they tried to mince and say, you know, he was following policy, this is what the booklet says. But when you have the people that essentially wrote the policy that are there testifying for the prosecution, that makes it very hard. Now, also, this doesn't matter for as the trial, but outside, remember, Neil, this is one of the first time where you had police unions who normally stick with the blue line all across the country say, this is not us. The video was just too horrific, Neil. And so you saw, although there were some people that defended him, by and large, most police officers and most police officer unions said, no, this is not us. We condemn this because it was so egregious. So you're right. It was hard to get experts, police experts, on his side for this because it was a stain on the profession. And, you know, they tried to, it was their job as the defense to show how hard the profession was. And the prosecution matched it by saying, yes, we know it's hard. And that's why we think that it is noble. And what you did dishonored the profession. And that was a brilliant back and forth strategy.
All right. Thank you, my friend, very much. For those of you tuning in at home, we are still waiting for the jury's decision. A verdict is in, we are told. Again, all of this goes back to the Derick Chauvin case, the officer involved in the death of George Floyd, facing 3 murder charges right now, or 3 charges to be more specific: second-degree unintentional murder, third-degree murder, second-degree manslaughter. Now the jury could convict him of one, two, or all three of these, or none, or none. Trace Gallagher, obviously this is taking, you know, a while to get everything set inside the courtroom as we watch these crowds build outside the courtroom.
Right.
What are you hearing?
Yeah, I mean, these always do, Neil. You got to get everybody the major players inside the courtroom. I just want to add, if I can, a little bit of context to the conversations you've been having. One with, Professor Jonathan Turley, who, of course, is brilliant, but he's saying that Derick Chauvin could likely spend the rest of his life in prison if he's convicted of either second or third degree murder. The research that we have done and the stories we have done in recent days show that's probably not accurate, because the 40-year sentence for the second degree murder, the 25-year sentence for third degree, and the 10-year sentence for the manslaughter, if you look in the history of Minneapolis and Minnesota and you look at the averages for even the second degree murder for 40 years, most of those inmates, the suspects, the people who are convicted, are only serving about 12 and a half years. Same goes for the third degree murder, serving an average of about 12 and a half years. Now, the prosecutors have said they will seek enhancements. Whether they get them, we have no idea. This is kind of up to the judge. But when you look at these possible sentences and the average time spent being 12 and a half years, that's because Derick Chauvin does not have any type of criminal past. And then you look at what people are actually serving. And in the state of Minnesota, people on average serve about 2/3 of their sentences. So then it kind of boils down to the fact you've got Derick Chauvin, who literally could be walking free in 8, 9, maybe 10 years, even if he is convicted on the most serious charge. And I think it's also important, Neil, to go back and remember that several months ago, Derick Chauvin was willing to plead guilty to third-degree murder. I mean, he was saying, look, I'm willing to plead guilty. He knew that would have entailed significant prison time, but the Attorney General then, Bill Barr, said no because it was one too early, and there was this kind of prospect that maybe a third-degree murder sentence was too lenient because the climate in the country was at such a heated rate. So that's one of those things. And you talk about what was important in the trial and what wasn't, Neil, and the seconds really were everything, because you look back and you think that 8 minutes and 46 seconds became a symbol for George Floyd. It was a clarion call to those who protested in the streets. And then you have the prosecutor go in on day one and show this video, and the video actually ticks up to 9 minutes, 29 seconds. Those 43 seconds in that courtroom were everything. And you knew when the defense was looking at that and looking at the clock that was a significant difference in what people thought. And the extra 43 seconds did not help Derick Chauvin one bit. They deliberated for 10 and a half hours, Neil. You have different, legal experts saying, well, that's a short verdict. It's a long verdict. All the trials that we've covered here on Fox News Channel, going back to O.J. Simpson, to Scott Peterson, to Michael Jackson, to Timothy McVeigh, a quick verdict, except in O.J. Simpson, is very bad news for the defendant. And I think that a lot of defense attorneys that we have talked to over the last several days and weeks would concur with the fact that this does not appear to bode well for Derick Chauvin, who, by the way, is 44 years old, and if convicted on all of these things, unless the sentences run concurrent, it's one after the other, then you're talking about the fact that he could walk out in 8, 9, 10 years, Neil.
Amazing. And I'd forgotten about his willingness to go ahead and agree to third-degree murder charges back at the beginning of all of this.
Yep.
Trace, thank you very much. Mercedes Conlon joins us on the phone right now. Mercedes, what do you read into this, the quick nature of this, and all the other things you've been hearing leading up to this verdict that we're supposed to hear any minute now?
Most defense attorneys will tell you, Neil, that if you've got a quick turnaround when the jury is deliberating, it is not good news for the defense. So a lot of defense, and you can see that from a lot of defense attorneys that are having the same reaction, that this does not bode well. And certainly, Trace is exactly right. Those 9-minute and 29-second video was absolutely devastating. And the defense did all they could to try to get around that video. They kept saying, don't focus on those 9 minutes and 29 seconds. There are 150,000 pages of evidence. There are lots of investigators involved. There was a lot that took place before the 9 minutes and 29 seconds came to be. But frankly, it's what the prosecutor said, and it resonates with this jury. Believe your eyes. See with your eyes. What you see is exactly what took place, the fact that Derick Chauvin murdered George Floyd. And it resonated. We'll have to see what happens with the verdict. But as a defense attorney, I think most defense attorneys will tell you that this was a very quick turnaround and does not bode well.
Mercedes, you only have about a minute, but your thoughts on that video, the significance of that video, because it wasn't just one video, but played on countless devices and smartphones, dozens of which were played and replayed from virtually every angle in that courtroom. Powerful for the prosecution. What do you think?
And it's what we deal with now in the advent of all these changes with our personal devices that can capture evidence in real time. This type of evidence is going to be with us for in infinitum. This is the type of evidence that you have to overcome, and it's extremely difficult to do so. And look, you and I watched that video. We know it was absolutely devastating. It dominated the news. Everyone I've spoken to, this is something that they watched, gut-wrenching. And for the jury to sit there and see it again, and certainly even when the defense tried to play certain parts of the video, it wasn't helpful at all. And you kept hearing, of course, George Floyd asking, just saying that he couldn't breathe over and over again 27 times. So it resonates. And we'll have to see what the jury decides.
All right, thank you, Mercedes Cohen. And it indeed became an iconic metaphor that many in the black community have used to say everyone has had their neck on African Americans. This proves.
Good afternoon from Fox News in Washington. I'm Mike Emanuel. We have a verdict in the high-profile trial of former Minneapolis police officer Derick Chauvin. The jury deliberating for 13 hours, announcing it has a verdict in this very high-profile case. Chauvin is facing 3 charges related to the death of George Floyd last year: second-degree murder, third-degree murder, second-degree manslaughter. The judge is Peter Cahill. Defense attorney Eric Nelson did his best to try to poke holes in the prosecution's argument, trying to say that basically Officer Chauvin was acting in a responsible way. Fox News correspondent Caroline Shively joins me live from outside the Minneapolis courthouse. Caroline, what's the scene there?
The crowd has grown rapidly. There are folks here talking into a PA system. You see the signs, convict Chauvin, police the police. This is a very fired up crowd, but a very peaceable crowd so far. They all want to know the very big question, these counts that you just went through, how will this go down? How will the verdicts come in for Derick Chauvin, who is now accused of killing George Floyd last year on May 25th?
Caroline, we heard about 90 minutes ago from the court that there was a verdict. Can you describe the stepped-up security in that time, obviously giving law enforcement an opportunity to get in position to try to keep a handle on things, I imagine?
Absolutely, Mike. I'm going to take a slow turn this way with my photographer, Phil. You'll see the crowd. This crowd wasn't here when we were down here an hour. If you take a look up at the Henneman County Government Center, you can see the members of the National Guard, one of the 3,000 National Guard members who have been activated in and around Minneapolis. You also see some local police officers there. We have seen Humvees. We've seen troop carriers going through the streets of Minneapolis. It's too tight here probably to see the boarded up windows. Most of the businesses and government buildings in and around downtown have been boarded up. They have seen the violent protests, and just anticipating any potential violent protests, they have boarded up those windows. The government center, the security, you probably saw some of this fencing. We've been talking about that throughout the day, Mike. You're looking at a 12-foot tall fence. Another fence is right behind that. That is 8 feet long. If you go on the back side of the government center here, that is covered in razor wire in certain points. They are taking this very seriously. The security here, they saw what went down in Brooklyn Center a few miles down the road after the killing of Dante Wright and the protest there. That is the last thing they want to happen. They've also gone to other governors in Ohio and Nebraska asking for some of their law enforcement to come help police this city. Law enforcement said they will use de-escalation techniques. They don't want to rough up any protesters, but things could get ugly here, Mike, depending on how this verdict goes down.
We know jurors have been sequestered, so presumably they are not aware of a lot of the coverage going on, but they certainly notice reporters scrutinizing them as they come and go from the courthouse. They undoubtedly realize there is a significant nature to this particular case. Bottom line, we wait to see what the jury has to say about this. We know the prosecution told the jurors to basically trust their eyes. Both sides used video from the George Floyd killing, and the prosecution emphasized trust your eyes, trust your judgment. Is that reasonable force? What about that, Caroline?
Sure, that is what he said over and over again. Believe your gut. He said what you have seen in this 9.5 minutes was not policing. This was murder. Going back to those 3 counts you were talking about, count 1, the second-degree unintentional murder. That is the one that could put Derick Chauvin, if convicted, behind bars for 40 years, probably more like 12.5 since he has a clean record. That the prosecution must prove Chauvin committed a felony assault in this case that led to the death of George Floyd. The next case is third-degree murder. That's the second count, also known as depraved mind murder. In that case, they would have to prove Chauvin caused Floyd's death in an act that was eminently dangerous. Basically, he should have known better. The lowest count is the manslaughter, second-degree manslaughter, that he had culpable negligence for causing the death of George Floyd. That could be punished by a maximum of 10 years.
Caroline?
More likely would be 4 years. Now, if he is convicted in this case,
Caroline?
the jury's job is not done. They will have to go back and decide if there were any aggravating circumstances. One could be, were there any children present? We know there was a 9-year-old child watching this entire time. That could boost up the sentencing in this case.
Caroline, great job out at the scene. We need to go inside the courtroom live. Judge Peter Cahill is in the chamber.
For the jury.
And let's listen.
Please be seated. Members of the jury, I understand you have a verdict. Members of the jury, I will now read the verdicts as they will appear in the permanent records of the 4th Judicial District. State of Minnesota, County of Hennepin, District Court, 4th Judicial District. State of Minnesota Plaintiff versus Derick Michael Chauvin, Defendant. Verdict, Count 1. Court File Number 27, CR 20-12646. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to Count 1, unintentional second-degree murder while committing a felony, find the defendant guilty. This verdict agreed to this 20th day of April, 2021 at 1:44 p.m. Signed, Juror Foreperson, Juror Number 19. Same caption, verdict, Count 2. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to Count 2, third-degree murder, perpetrating an eminently dangerous act, find the defendant guilty. This verdict agreed to this 20th day of April, 2021 at 1:45 p.m. Signed by Jury Foreperson, Juror Number 19. Same caption, verdict, Count 3. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to Count 3, second-degree manslaughter, culpable negligence, creating an unreasonable risk, find the defendant guilty. This verdict agreed to this 20th day of April, 2021 at 1:45 p.m. Jury Foreperson 019. Members of the jury, I'm now going to ask you individually if these are your true and correct verdicts. Please respond yes or no. Juror Number 2, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror Number 9, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror Number 19, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror Number 27, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror Number 44, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror Number 52, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror Number 55, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror Number 79, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror Number 85, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror Number 89, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror Number 91, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror Number 92, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Are these your verdicts, so say you one, so say you all?
Yes. Yes.
Members of the jury, I find that the verdicts as read reflect the will of the jury and will be filed accordingly. I have to thank you on behalf of the people of the state of Minnesota for not only jury service, but heavy-duty jury service. What I'm going to ask you to do now is to follow the deputy back into your usual room, and I will join you in a few minutes to answer questions and to advise you further. So, all rise for the jury. All right, be seated. With the guilty verdicts returned, we're going to have Blakely, you may file a written argument as to Blakely factors within 1 week. The court will issue findings on the Blakely factors, the factual findings, 1 week after that. We'll order a PSI immediately returnable in 4 weeks. And we will also have a briefing on, after you get the PSI, 6 weeks from now, and then 8 weeks from now we will have sentencing. We'll get you the exact dates in a scheduling order. Is there a motion on behalf of the state?
Your Honor, the state would move to have the court revoke the defendant's bail and remand him into custody pending sentencing.
Bail is revoked, bond is discharged, and the defendant is remanded to the custody of the Hennepin County Sheriff. Anything further?
Oh, Your Honor.
Thank you.
A Minneapolis jury finds former police officer Derick Chauvin guilty of second-degree murder, guilty of third-degree murder, and guilty of second-degree manslaughter. So we await a reaction from outside the courthouse. Bottom line, a lot of folks across the country who watched that video of the death of George Floyd will undoubtedly be pleased by the jury's findings in this case. We await sentencing that week, 8 weeks from today, as we just heard from the judge. For full reaction and fallout from the Derick Chauvin trial, please stay with this local Fox station. I'm Mike Emanuel, Fox News. Good afternoon.
As you just heard, former Minneapolis police officer Derick Chauvin, charged in the murder of George Floyd, has been found guilty on all charges this afternoon. Sentencing will be in about 8 weeks. The jury of 5 men and 7 women deliberated for 4 hours yesterday and resumed deliberating this morning. A total of 13 hours to reach this decision. Chauvin was facing second-degree unintentional murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter. Again, found guilty on all charges. Our coverage continues tonight on Fox News at 9 as more reaction comes in tonight from our local city leaders and President Biden. We'll be back right here at 9.
We now return to regular programming.